So I'm already gonna be specific as of now. As we may or we may not have noticed, Need for Speed Unbound is already coming up, or better yet, known as Need for Speed 2020. And based on this anime kind of related gameplay, as far as I know, it might be somewhat relatable to Need for Speed Heat, Need for Speed Payback, and 2015 in some form of ways that I have yet to know as of right now. However, with this game coming up, it's eventually coming up with not only just some racing, but it's also coming up with some special effects that look, quote, anime-ish. And I mean, yes, it may look anime in some form of ways, but kind of looks cool since we haven't had this kind of stuff happen inside of a Need for Speed game. But just because I say that doesn't mean that I would really want to show support for this game, as I remain skeptical inside of my own personal point of view as to how this game actually would go down in multiple ways that, well, should be obvious for everyone to notice. Now, some people might come over to my channel and decide to say over at me, these two type of people. Those who are actually new to playing the Need for Speed series at some certain point, and or the people that have actually played Need for Speed for a very long time but is very oblivious to what EA has been doing to their franchises most of the time as of today. And thus I quote for some of you people that might say, but ICE, EA is EA. They're just trying to give us a video game to play. Well, I cannot blame you that you are actually right on those two aspects. However, you should revise a little bit more on what the current situation is. While yes, EA is EA, the thing you need to understand is that EA has been actually finding ways to milk video games in some certain cases. The first example would be DLCs. They've been doing DLCs for quite a while, ever since the PS3 era, until they eventually come to the conclusion of loot boxes when it comes to the PS4 and Xbox One, as well as PC. Eventually, they'll do the same thing for the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and or S. And aspect number two, yeah, sure, EA is making video games. But I wouldn't even say that they're actually good video games, since at one point EA decided to butcher some of the gameplay. This could either apply for the story for certain video games, the gameplay physics and mechanics, the game features that were once a part of the game but never to be brought back in ever again. Those kind of stuff is what I'm going to be saying for the least. For example, on Need for Speed, we once had split screen, but then EA decided, oh, split screen is no longer the case anymore. Online is better, which I kind of say is a stupid thing, because most of the game studios as of today, like Nintendo or even Namco or so, a lot of other video game companies out there that are making, well, games somewhat relatable to Need for Speed and or some other game, they would most likely put local multiplayer in some form of ways, and this could be either in split screen or shared screen as a whole. So the general quota within this being said is that these are the fewest reasons why I really don't feel like I should trust EA with a video game like this, and why they're also a game studio that has been mostly hated throughout its time at one point when they just decided to make changes. These changes going from good to bad to worse. And at this point on, it has gotten worse. And I feel like Need for Speed Unbound is not going to be unbounded by these kind of stuff as far as I'm concerned. This being, of course, the loot boxes possibly, even the in-game purchases such as other in-game purchases such as DLCs. And something tells me that much like Need for Speed Payback, this game might also have an in-game purchase system. I just don't really know. I have a bad feeling since, EA is just trying to find ways to make easy money. Anything that involves this just boggles my mind to say that I really don't want to buy this game because of whatever the fuck EA is doing. Because as far as I'm concerned, I'm just sick and tired trying to buy their shit just for the sake of trying out something that looks actually cool. But then again, they're not giving me an option here, so I don't know. I might debate over on buying the game or not. And since the game is being developed by Criterion Games, I feel like the game might have potential at some form of way, unlike Ghost Games, of course. The way I say that is because the gameplay physics and mechanics might do a little bit more better than what Ghost Games have done so for the previous few titles. As far as I'm concerned, there probably would be a minor set of bugs and or glitches. Probably none, if I'm not mistaken. It could be possible. I'm just not too certain what is going to happen at some point on. I forgot to mention, if there are some people that might come over and tell me, oh, but Ice, they got ASAP Rocky. This guy is absolutely awesome at making music. Do they have ASAP Rocky? Yes. Do I listen to his music? No. Do I care? Not really. I mean, sure, musicians could be featured within video games like Snoop Dogg inside of Need for Speed No Limits, and even Underground 2, as far as I'm concerned, when he made a song called Riders on a Storm, a remix, of course, original by The Doors. And, well, yeah, that's just accurate enough. And while that musicians do make appearances within these video games, it really doesn't bother me to care that much, as they're not really the part that I focus upon within the game. The only thing that I focus on mainly is the characters. Well, of course, you would say the musician's the character too, but I don't know what role he's playing in. Come on. And I'm talking about the main characters, the protagonists, the antagonists, the side characters, and so on and so forth, as well as some of the vehicles and, well, the story itself. Those are the fewest things that concern me the most, if anything. And the term of IP support I should mention about this game is that I feel like the game is going to need updates from time to time, as far as I'm concerned, if we are going to keep ourselves, well, if EA and Criterion are going to plan to keep us entertained with this game for a long while, to make it worth our time, as far as I am concerned. I mean, of course, Ghost Games was originally supposed to do that with Need for Speed Heat. However, that opportunity had gone past since 3 updates, and they weren't really the best updates as far as I know. I had mentioned these updates in another video. I will link the video down to you below as to which one I specifically said. Feel free to watch it if you want, or don't. It's fine. You know what was kind of ironic though? EA was part of my good side of the childhood. Back in 2001 was the year I was born, and they were making quite a few games. One of them, of course, my dad had bought Need for Speed Underground for the PS2, and I played it, and it was actually good. Then he continued on to buy some other Need for Speed games, specifically saying Underground 2, Most Wanted from 2005, and Need for Speed Carbon, and then Need for Speed Pro Street, all into one console, which was the PS2, and I loved those games as far as I'm concerned. He even gone as far as to getting some of the Need for Speed games on the PSP, such as Need for Speed Most Wanted 510, even if it's not the really best Need for Speed of all to exist. He even got Need for Speed Underground Rivals and, well, Need for Speed Pro Street for the PSP, of course. He even got me Need for Speed Undercover for the DS, and in Need for Speed Carbon Own the City as well. And those were the fewest Need for Speeds I recall, until we went up to Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2010. It eventually got to the point where things are about to change, so they're gonna go from good to bad at one point. I mean, I didn't think of it like that, but it was inevitable. And thus being said, it's a secret no longer after Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012 had released. Now here is why that things would go from good to bad. Because eventually, inside of Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, we would have some DLC vehicles. Of course, it may have annoyed some of us at some certain point, but we still got it. But then Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012 was in the development, and we thought it was much like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, it was going to be polished and well designed. However, it wasn't. Until after Burnout Paradise was made, EA wanted Criterion to make Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012, but at a very tight schedule. So whatever Criterion Games tried to utilize to put inside the game, whatever content was cut. This being, of course, characters, the story, and whatever features they wanted to feature in the most that people would find satisfying within the game. Of course, it led to Need for Speed Most Wanted 2 to being called Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012 at some certain point, which, of course, was just a burnout game with licensed cars, as most people say nowadays. Not everyone liked it. As a matter of fact, a lot of people hated it, and it's one of the fewest reasons that shows that EA is done straight up going to ruin themselves in the near future. And turns out most people who had determined that weren't actually wrong at some point. And that didn't stop there. It evolved on from Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012 when it comes to in-game purchases and just ridiculously bad gameplay, to going to Need for Speed 2015, as I had mentioned in the other video as well, in regards to online-only gameplay, to Need for Speed Payback, where you have to buy stuff inside the game, in-game purchases, much like a mobile game, and of course use cards for a roulette system, which is based on luck, which EA doesn't know how luck fucking works. And then Need for Speed Heat. The disappointment of them all is because of the McLaren F1 being merely $5, maybe even $6. And utterly, it just gets worse and worse. And since Need for Speed Unbound is coming up, it is going to be even more worse than anticipated in regards to in-game purchases and DLCs. But with this being said, I don't really know everything as of yet, as I have yet to play the game until it actually fully releases. And I actually don't want to buy the game just right away. Instead, I'll actually watch a few YouTubers who actually play the game, and I'll try to speculate upon my own view within some of the YouTubers' videos, such as Black Panther, The Slap Train, or even AR12 Gaming, and just see if it's worth my while just to buy the game and then play it on my own, probably get some in-game purchases, because I don't know. Need for Speed just practically died out on me anyways, since it just, well, ever since EA decides to make stupid decisions, of course, they decide to ruin Need for Speed as a whole, which makes me not want to buy a new Need for Speed as it is. And some people might say, oh my god, if you want Black Box made Need for Speed, go on the internet and try to find them and stop asking for a remaster. A remaster is not what I'm asking for. Besides, I'm past the point that I want a new Need for Speed by Black Box. If they're no longer a studio to be making any more video games, then they're no longer a studio making video games. It doesn't matter to me. At least they did good at one point. But if they're done, they're done. I can understand that much. And then again, I just find Ghost Games as a disappointment anyways, since they didn't really do good on Need for Speed at their own, well, decade, I should say. And I feel like Criterion, that Need for Speed Unbound will be the last Need for Speed game, if not the last video game that Criterion will ever make. I don't really know for certain. I'm just assuming what might happen and what might not happen eventually. And with this being said, I know this was a very short, well, not very short, but somewhat of a shorter discussion video. It's because really there's not very much to talk about, but speculate on what might eventually happen inside of Need for Speed Unbound, as it happens to be common inside of the other Need for Speed games as it is. So really, to me, it makes no difference as to what I should be able to speculate or not. But gameplay, I will do so, but just not on my personal point of view. And with this being said, my name is IceShadow01. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like. If you want to leave a comment, you could do so. If you want to subscribe, feel free to do so as well. And with this being said, I shall see you on the next episode. See you guys.